Now, can you see that? Energy training for professionals. So if Mark was looking at the trades end of it, I was asked to look at the professional side, which makes sense in that that's what I do. Proud to say that my little practice, and there's about 3.5 of us, have trained 630 design professionals in the last 3 years over day-long, 1.5 day and 2 day courses, which I'm pretty pleased about. That's just a printout from, let's say, the RAI, the Royal Institute of Architects of Ireland's CPD page, just identifying what courses are available. That page runs to 2 or 3 pages now, 2 pages nowadays, and the 2 that are white there are 2 of the courses that we've created and run for them. So who are we? We're Low Energy Architects, as Kieran said. The Fabric Consultancy was mentioned already. Really, I was involved in the technical subcommittee for the generation of the acceptable construction details. I was drafted in about halfway through the process, and it was kind of an awakening event for me in that I realised around the room there was only 2 people of about 25 people in the room who actually could understand what air tightness was actually about and what low thermal bridging actually meant. The rest of them were either political, they were there as civil servants, there weren't that many of those, or they were there representing big business, and there was plenty of them, and some of those were deliberately filibustering and delaying processes and trying to make as little change as possible, and there were about half the room never spoke. But there was one builder, and there was myself, and we were jumping out of our seats saying, please, please make changes. And the documents are okay, they're largely copied over from the UK, but the message for me was, my God, there is such an extraordinary lack of knowledge. That was the summer of 2008, and I already knew other things in that area. We'd already been moving towards training and lecturing anyway, and the Building Fabric Consultancy, the Building Life Consultancy, BLC there, was set up in 2009, and we teach a number of courses and we give a number of consultancies. We've provided consultancies on building fabric evaluation in the Czech Republic, in Scotland, in England, in Canada, and of course in many, many places in Ireland. We do expert witness work, we evaluate problem buildings, and we're working at super low energy standard as well. So we're kind of over here, we're obviously involved in the design and construction. Over here we're involved in helping other people to do that and raising standards. And then over here is all the education side. So the 3, even though we're a small team, these kind of things, we see them feeding into each other. It's a difficult business model in terms of controlling things, but we've skills and we've tools that are not common in the industry. We've an awareness, and even in dealing with other architects and other builders, that again gives us insights, and we try and apply this across the board. As Kieran just said, we've the first Enerfit house in Ireland will be certified within about a week. So what are we trying to do in general? Mark, myself, Kieran, Jason, we're fighting climate change nationally, and at the moment it's one retrofit at a time. So, and again, I'm referring to the National Energy Efficiency Action Plan as opposed to the National Retrofit Plan. Apologies if they're all a bit confusing. This one's actually a little bit older, but it sets out Ireland's task from 2009 to 2020 to reach an overall reduction of 20% in everything that we do in terms of energy reduction by 2020. Now these figures might be slightly old, but as about 44% of that's expected to come from the residential sector, and as housing completions have dropped off by at least 85%, it really means that the burden of Ireland's, in the construction sector, of Ireland's task and efforts to reach these onerous targets is coming from retrofit. So really, Mrs. Johnson's insulation works and Mr. McCarthy's retro extension are now a key element of policy in fighting climate change and reducing energy imports. And for homeowners to realise, do you know what? This project is not just about your kitchen extension. It's not just about the external insulation to increase your comfort in winter. This is actually a key element in Ireland dealing with climate change and reducing our dependency on foreign fuels. To really understand you're part of this and you're actually having a big impact, I think is a very important thing educationally for the homeowner, but I also think for everyone else involved in that project. While new build standards are obviously moving fast towards carbon neutrality, I mean, you know, people talk about a 40% and a 60% change, etc. That is literally like asking a guy to get out of the welly boots and get into a spacesuit. We are talking about extraordinary levels of changes to care, quality, construction methods, technologies, interrelationship of these systems, and overall something that's becoming highly integrated in general. Energy efficiency standards have, however, lagged significantly. TGDL 2011, Technical Guidance Document 2011, came out on December 1st, says very little about retrofit. It does tighten up on some values. Some of it we think is good. Some of it we think is actually a big mistake. We submitted, like other bodies, significant amount in the consultation process. Very little of that was taken up. However, the Code of Practice for retrofit of dwellings should be coming out in 2013. It should be going to consultation before the end of this year. Please take part in actually looking and taking part in that consultation process, because what it says will be what we are told to do for the next however many years. The government will say compliance is, related to Part L. Technical Guidance Document L tells you something, but in retrofit, really follow the Code of Practice. And that will be the pathway. And if that isn't the best document it can be, we're going to be left with another lame duck. So it is very important. Bear in mind, that's 4 years after the action plan came out. So in 2013, it's already late. If we're talking about reaching the 2020 goal, we already have a problem with a lack of guidance, and even in that one document. There is excellent guidance on traditional buildings. It's only slowly coming together. Well, actually, it's coming together quite fast historically, but only in the last year, 2 years, guidance on traditional buildings. Check out the technical papers from the Sustainable Traditional Building Alliance, which is going to launch something in about the next 6 months. English Heritage, which have got about 9 manuals coming out in the next 2-3 months. And Historic Scotland, which have at least 16 technical papers, which are excellent. And we contributed to, we authored one of those. So these are really good bodies doing things across the water. And I'd urge you to take account of them. We know what our overall goal is. How are we going to get there? And I'm not going to go through all this in detail, but we know about the Energy Performance of Building Directives. We know the 2005 regulations are used as a baseline. Before then, compliance for buildings was purely judged in terms of a target value. Have you hit that insulation value? Have you hit that glazing value? All these sorts of measures, and that was it. That was compliance. But the EPC, the Energy Performance Coefficient, is a whole building value, and that value is becoming far more important than those target values. So, for instance, in Table 5 or Table 1 of the new Part L, it could tell you build a wall to 0.21 watts per metre squared Kelvin. And the notion is that you'll comply. You won't. Unless you build that wall to at least 0.14 watts per metre squared Kelvin, which is effectively a passive house value, you will not comply, because the EPC will not be a compliant EPC. So that element, which can only be determined in deep, will actually increasingly drive things. And the industry does not understand this, neither builders nor architects. 2008, the building regulations, the 40% reduction on 2005, that was very onerous. And unfortunately, there was so much less building from that point onwards. The learning through iterations on site has not been there. 60% changes on 2005 from December 1st. Again, the low-hanging fruit, a lot of it's been picked, so the elements where we're getting that extra level of efficiency are getting harder and harder. They're more and more complex. The recast Energy Performance Building Directive is coming out. That will require for the first time that building energy ratings are advertised before the sale. So estate agents will be forced, everyone will be forced to have, even on the notice outside the door, outside the gate, this house is a B1, but that one over there is a G, is G, which one would you like to buy on the same street? So that will affect homeowners in terms of their education and their willingness to pay extra money for a low energy building. The Code of Practice, as I said, coming out. Then we're looking at non-domestic buildings and we're looking at serious changes there. Carbon neutral framework for new dwellings. What does this mean? Well, we're suggesting at the moment it's something like 70% improvement on 2005. Now this is now really, we're in spacesuits at this point. It's a metaphor, but this is difficult stuff for the current industry. 60% for non-domestic, nearly zero energy. Again, what does that mean? Nearly zero energy for all buildings. That's the 2020 target hit. But this stuff here, this is very onerous. If we could really gain true compliance up here, I would actually be very, very happy. We're very far from true compliance. Down here at the very end, I'm taking my breath in. That'll be really difficult. So what happens when we measure how we actually build? What are the results? The very, very interesting study, I think it has huge implications for the Irish industry. Stamford Brook, an estate in the UK near Warrington, 700 houses, designed in 2002, finished in 2007. 1/3 of the landowners was the National Trust. And they said, lads, if we're going to do this, we're going to do it properly, we're going to measure it, and we're going to learn from it. There's going to be no fault disclosures, but we want change, we want information. And they did it. And in fact, it actually ended up with changes to the British regulations. The British Part L is different because of what they learned here. And we need the equivalent, relearning. Now, what was very interesting is that they found that there were significant performance gaps between what was designed and what was actually built. And if you can see there, This was the standard they were looking for. That's actually what they broadly achieved. If this is a reduction, this is a designed and intended reduction, and this is the actual real reduction in various projects. That's what they intended. That's what they actually did. Even though they were really trying hard in this project, this wasn't a normal project. So that's equivalent to what they got. So when they wanted to be here, they actually achieved that. Now, low carb for real, this was a study that came from that the learnings of that housing project and other housing projects, and there was fantastic learning, and we can replicate that, where you basically have everyone from the brickie to the quantity surveyor to the developer to the architect at the same table, talking to each other, learning, listening, feeding in. It's not just about professionals over here and tradesmen over here, and maybe they might learn something from each other. It's actually getting everyone together. Here's a timber frame building very quickly, where they were looking at, this was the standard that they didn't know what was in the floor, so they said, yes, that's what we designed, that's what we intended, we're saying that's what we achieved. Here was the wall, that's what they intended, that's actually what they achieved. That's what they intended for the roof, that's what they achieved. That was for the windows, and again, that's what they achieved. Over here, that's what they got. They didn't expect any heat loss in cavity walls, in cavity party walls, but they had significant loss. And that's what changed the building regulations in the UK with that in regard to that. Thermal bridging, far poorer, and general fabric heat loss, more than twice what was intended. And this was in a careful and it makes you think that perhaps we shouldn't be creating ever higher standards. We actually have really high standards now. 2011 is really high. Perhaps we should be working for a greater percentage of buildings actually meeting those standards, and general widespread education, really integrated learning. I think this little cartoon makes the point. We are in an industry without a culture of measuring our learning. And that's extremely important. If you were an ordinary GP and you found something interesting, you would have the ability and would have the inclination, you might even be forced to by your ethics committee, I don't know, to write into the Lancet or report what it is that you're learning. However, so that the ordinary practitioner right up to the top specialist, they're actually part of a knowledge exchange that's ongoing and through the years and at different levels and somewhat integrated. We don't have that. We don't go back to our buildings. Builders leave the building before the plumbing is used, before the heating system's turned on. Architects don't tend to go back unless there's problems again. And we're not used to thinking about what we've done. Post-occupancy evaluation, POE, is still a very, very new thing. And that's basically saying, did we do it? Did we do it right? How do the owners actually use it? It might have been designed as a low-carbon building, but is it actually a low-carbon building in reality? So we need to change, we need to learn, we need to do that fast. So this is a quote from the one of the studies from Low Carb for Real, which I think is very important. Underperformance, currently masked by cheap energy, and we still have very cheap energy. Do not think energy is expensive in historical terms. It's not. Masked by cheap energy and oversized heating systems will become more noticeable and less acceptable as energy prices rise and target emission rates are reduced. The carbon emissions limits of Code Level 3, this is talking about the UK, the Code for Sustainable Homes, and beyond are likely to entail increased complexity, less redundancy, faster rates of innovation, and unfamiliar low and zero carbon technologies. Unless the house building industry is able to develop systems and a culture capable of managing these challenges, underperformance is likely to increase in relative and possibly even absolute terms. Specifically, the ability of all parts of the construction industry to learn and to retain that learning will need to be transformed. And that really applies in this country. Now, what are we doing about it? It's great to kind of poke holes in other people. What are we doing in my little consultancy, my practice? Well, we've actually created 4 different courses. The first of those, I went to the RAI in 2009 and said, you've got big problems, you're not taking it, well, I'm not saying you're not taking it seriously, but there is a lack of training here. We can provide a course, put it on the ground within 9 months, and it can make a difference to architects. And they said, do it. So we created a one-day course, Designing Low-Energy Domestic Refurbs. It deals with everything from payback, building physics, ventilation, air tightness, evaluating the use of DEEP, the software, all sorts of different things. We've actually followed that with another building fabric design, which now focuses on solutions, both new build and retrofit, to genuinely be compliant with Part L. And there is very, very little in the country that actually gives people information about that. And I'll talk more about that in a moment. Thermal bridge assessment course is fairly obvious. It's about evaluating the extra overheat loss at junctions. And in the event of the NSAI thermal modeler scheme that's come out, we had this training up ahead of that in anticipation. And we felt we'd have quite a few people coming through because of that scheme. The scheme's been made extremely expensive, and the number of people we've been putting through has been quite small, but it is continuing. Most of the people who are doing thermal bridge modelling in Ireland at the moment have been trained by us. WFI Pro training workshop. This is to do with this hygrothermal numerical simulation. Basically, what's actually going on, what we understand is going on in the middle of your wall, particularly if it's an older wall or masonry. It is prediction, it is a simulation, but it is far in advance of the standard evaluation methods, which for masonry or heavyweight buildings are simply wrong. So most of the industry is using the wrong evaluation method according to the standards of those evaluation methods. Very important thing that. Now, as far as we know, prior to the launch of designing low energy domestic refurbs, so early 2010, there was nobody teaching architects DEEP, the dwelling energy assessment procedure or process. That's a mandatory compliance tool. It's not in the technical guidance, it's actually in the law. You cannot prove that your new build is compliant unless you've used DEEP. End of discussion. There's no other way to prove it. And most architects, 70% of the people who are going through my doors, let's say, since January 2010, we've run the course about 24 or 25 times. 70% typically haven't used DEEP before. That's probably improving slightly, but initially that's what we were talking about. The RAI had never had a low energy or energy efficiency focused CPD. So in 2010, the institute, the professional institute, which I think highly of, but like any institute, there can also be gaps there, they had never had a low energy or energy efficiency focused CPD. That's a bit shocking. There was no CPDs, continuous professional development courses, available anywhere that I know about in Ireland on low energy compliant design that were not manufacturer or supplier led. So giving disinterested advice as a design professional, nowhere, as far as I know. There was no focus on retrofit solutions and what made them different to new build in general in the industry. There was no manual on Irish construction methods compliant to Part L. Now, some people in the room might say, well, wait a second, there was the Homebond Manual Edition 6. If you read the Homebond Edition Manual 6, or you read the new one that's just out, number 7, they are not fully compliant. If you design according to that manual and think by using those details and by using that guidance, you will have a compliant building, you're wrong. And if you'd like to know more about that, the last 2 pages of the last edition of Construct Ireland, which is in Eason's at the moment, is my review on the Homebond Manual Edition 7. And it is a case of the Construction Industry Federation massively letting down their builders. And any other designer who uses it. It is a significant problem because it was used as the Bible in construction for a long time. They've got left behind and they don't know it. There was no environmental accreditation for design professionals. There was no post-grad courses on retrofit. So all of those things were where we were starting in 2010. I'm very glad to say that's changing rapidly and it's a very positive change. So at the moment, as far as I know, and this is just a snapshot, and I'm sure I'm missing out lots, training for professionals in 2012, 2013, there are now, there was at the time, in fairness, Passive House designer courses, but they were focused on new build, but they are very impressive courses. The contractor course is only new this year, and it's fantastic. DIT, Bolton Street, is now launching postgrad and masters and certificate diploma courses in digital analysis, energy retrofit technologies, building information modelling and thermal bridging. So they're really going for it in terms of these technologies and assembling really clever teams. The RAI has just launched, as of a week ago, the RAI Environmental CPD accreditation based on one online CPD and 3 live courses at the moment. 2 of those courses are mine. But those courses, there will be more courses in the future, and that is a way of being able to say, not only, yes, you as an architect have trained and learned, but you know what, we're going to give you this badge, so you'll be able to prove to other people that you've trained and learned. So maybe there's a market advantage to you, all well and good. If people can understand that they'll earn more money doing this work properly, they'll do the work properly. The Retrofit Code of Practice, hopefully that will give good support next year. GMIT, I think they're creating a Masters in Environmental Systems. I think that's mostly aimed at construction managers who are now out of work. WIT, Waterford IT, are proposing a retrofit postgrad. And I'm going to be talking about bridging the performance gap is something that I'm proposing we get involved with. And it'll be taking place at the Better Building Conference in April, late April 2013. So that's just a snapshot. There are other measures, but there are things happening, and that's really good news. But we need a lot. Now, examples of the content of the course that we teach. This is the kind of thing. It's just, I mean, a lot of it's kind of, you're taking people from quite a low base. Some of the architects I'm teaching are 65, they're 70. Most of them are older than me, certainly. And a lot of people are on their own. A lot of people haven't had to do serious learning. A lot of people had technologists in the office that they can't afford to pay anymore. And they were the guys who used Deep, or they were the guys who understood these things. And the guys I'm talking to and teaching now were managers. But the managers need to get back to the coalface. So we're kind of teaching them about energy units, we're teaching them about different ways of thinking, about how you talk about different thermal performances, getting people away from just U value, talking about pure energy, watts per Kelvin, talking about different ways of the energy flow, the energy value of a building, how you measure things, talking about non-compliant ways of building that are in the guidance documents, talking about better ways of doing that, talking about old cultures, talking about new cultures of building, thermal bridge evaluation, understanding detailing, understanding the physics of what you're doing, understanding retrofit technology and issues, understanding the mechanisms of achieving energy reduction. So what is the EPC, the CPC, what is a 60% reduction, what does that mean, where does it go in Deep? All these sorts of different issues. Obviously, I'm not reading this stuff through because this is just examples. Talking about ways of managing the process of getting energy tightness, ways of marking up the drawings, ways of helping yourself as a designer design better, more airtight buildings, creating a process and a structure for the builder on site so it's easier, facilitating a higher performance on site, looking at problems that we found on site, OSB 3 boards that actually leaked during airtightness tests. What did we do to overcome it? All sorts of practical, specific issues, talking about compliance and even the glass box extension. Well, look at what's happening to performance in glazing. This is for different levels of, 1 minute, yeah? As we move towards higher standards, that green line there, that glass box extension, which is 70%, the glazing represents 70% of the floor area, that now needs to be out here. It needs to have an overall U value of 0.7, which is effectively moving into passive house windows, or even arguably quadruple glazing, which suggests to me the end of the glass box era. But designers need to understand that. Again, retrofit conditions and looking at the compromises that you need to make in retrofit, but what you don't compromise on and what's needed, the solutions. This is the number of times the courses have been taught. This is about the third last slide, and that's the Designing Low Energy Domestic Refurb course, a great take-up. But as we've moved further on, people have less and less cash. This is 2010, 2011, 2012. We've taught 630 professionals in all of that. These are the 4 courses. That new course, Building Fabric Design, that should be doing the same thing as this in terms of what architects need, but they've less cash. We've taught in other countries as well at some of those times. Sharp fall-off has been experienced by the RAI. Architects have less money to give to training. They have less chance of learning on sites because there's less sites. How are they meant to learn? We need government support. And then the last slide. So feedback about course and the content. We generally get high marks in feedback. We're also told to avoid the scientific basis. They want the fish, they don't want the fishing rod. And just cut to the solutions. Well, we feel they need the fishing rod. We're frequently told courses should be longer, but would they take longer out of the office if they were? The variance in knowledge amongst attendees is huge. Passive house designers and builders are clearly differentiated from the general level of knowledge in the market. It does show something. Professionals feel buffeted by constant onerous changes in legislation and standards. Many would prefer one large change than many smaller. I mean, why don't we just go to Passive House now and cut out all the intermediate changes? We know what we're then aiming for. They can feel unsupported by legislators, by institutes and by educators of the new graduates, because the new graduates are not coming out necessarily with an understanding of this at all. They're coming out very often from architecture schools knowing how to design pretty buildings. And I have a real problem with that. They complain that if they learn, the builder, the engineer and the quantity surveyor aren't. So are they on their own? Is the industry moving with them? All despair at the dysfunctional building control system. They know how often the budget or builder hinders building quality. They're less willing to see how their aesthetic and technical designs often do as well. Changes have happened so quickly that we can have difficulty persuading some of them that what we're teaching is not an elective higher standard, some wish list. It's actually minimum compliance. And they all go away with a fresh understanding of what they need to learn. So the last thing, a proposal, the last slide. What we're suggesting is that we actually recreate what happened in the Low Carb for Real study. This isn't the panacea for everything, but this is just one thing that we can do at the Better Building Conference, and perhaps some physical studies and measuring of buildings that can come from that, where basically you had all these different people from the different trades and professions around the table. They were marking up drawings, they were looking at details, they were talking about what they do, what they need, the support they want. But it's not as Mark was saying, the legislators and the organisations talking. It's actually the people doing it talking. I mean, we need both, obviously, but I think that'll be a really valuable thing to do. It's going to be happening in the Better Building Conference. Come along. Thank you.